Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today my guest is a return guest, Dave Brock. Many of you will be aware of him because of his fabulous book, The Sales Manager's Survival Guide. But he's recently produced a book called Is Good Enough Good Enough? And we're going to discuss whether or not people settle, whether they're looking at the right end of the problem. If you've got a 15% win rate, that means you're investing in an 85% loser rate. And we're going to look at things in a contrarian fashion. We'll probably agree on many things, but the reality is that Dave comes at things with a fresh perspective. I believe you're a physicist originally.
Yes.
So
Got a good memory.
Absolutely. Well, he approaches things from a scientific perspective and a human perspective, and he's a pragmatist. And one of the really surprising things about his book is his co-author is Claude AI. And in fact, Claude wrote the foreword, or a foreword to his book, and he's not apologetic about it. He didn't abdicate to it. He used it as a thought partner. And that's something else that we're going to explore today as well. So Dave, without any further ado, can we have maybe 60 seconds on your history and tell people a little bit about your background?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Marcus. Not many people know that I was actually on the track to get my PhD in applied physics, but I jumped out of the university and research system into business, had a business career. Today, I run a boutique consulting company called Partners in Excellence, and we work with primarily very large organizations around the world in kind of business strategy and go-to-market strategies. And then, as I said, I authored a number of years ago, Sales Manager's Survival Guide, and just released it, just hit the streets about 2 days ago. My new book is Good Enough, Good Enough, and the subtitle is Mindsets and Behaviors for Sales Excellence.
Excellent. So Dave, you write about people staying busy while underperforming their potential.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see people moving every day but not actually going anywhere?
We see this all the time, is we see people going through the motions. We see people confusing being busy in activity levels with producing the desired outcomes or achieving the goals that we are setting for ourselves as human beings, as individuals or professionals. And so we get distracted by it, and we have these kind of reinforcing loops built into our systems that reinforce those behaviors. So for instance, we see so many leaders with activity metrics. So they're reinforcing, perhaps mindless activity rather than looking at what are the critical activities that we need to do to achieve our goals. What are the critical things that we do, and do we have the behaviors that enable us to try and achieve those goals? One of the behaviors I outline in the book is accountability. And accountability is, I sit down with all sorts of people, and what I hear are excuses. They're good excuses, but I very seldom hear real accountability. And what you see in high performers is they fail, they try and understand what they did, and they try and change it, and they take personal accountability for that failure. Even though the loss of failure may have been very reasonable, they constantly try and figure it out and hold themselves accountable. They don't blame the competition, the price, the products, or anything like that. They say, I can control what I can control, and what I'm going to do is look at how I am accountable for those things and that I do those things.
Well, that raises some really interesting questions about beliefs, values, and mindset.
Yep.
The first one is that accountability is something you do yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't hold other people accountable. That's generally being a supervisor, and you're normally beating people either with a stick or a carrot.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that high performers believe they have agency, whereas
Yep.
those who don't perform so well abdicate that agency and blame, and they make excuses. And so it's really important that in the interview and selection process of candidates, in the promotion pathways, in terms of day-to-day reporting, we
Mm-hmm.
listen out for these qualities in the language
Yep.
because that tells us whether or not someone is very likely to be a top performer, and they improve incrementally. Last night I was on a call, and one of my clients, who's truly fabulous, Teddy Peck, was talking about his journey going from traditional seller struggling and then becoming much more buyer-centric. But the thing that drove him was that search for his own excellence and taking personal ownership. So what tends to look like progress in sales and leadership, but is actually slow decay? Let's explore that.
Well, so again, I think, you know, through all sorts of different things that happen in business and in life, we tend to somehow get derailed and distracted and go in incorrect directions. And again, none of this is malicious. The issue a lot of times is we're just unconscious of what we're doing. Um, and so I think a lot of the decay ends up being, you know, activity over outcomes and intent. I think a lot of this, when I look at overall organizational performance, both organization and individual performance is a lack of purpose, lack of aligned purpose, and lack of an aligned kind of direction of what we're trying to do. And what you see is, in purpose is kind of this obscure, kind of maybe perhaps slightly philosophical word, but what is it that we're here to do other than achieve a goal? I mean, what do we stand for in our markets, with our customers, in our community, and those kinds of things? And what's our purpose? And when we get derailed from that purpose, we start accepting excuses. We start performing not to our full potential. Again, the interesting thing with this is we could be hitting our goals, and we could, you know, pat ourselves on the back saying this is all wonderful, but when we could be achieving so much more. And I, you know, frankly, I'm a greedy person. I want to achieve as much as I possibly can. And and so I'm, you know, if you could always find a way to push yourself and say, what are the limits? How can you do this? And then later come back and say, how can I extend it anymore? It goes back to, you know, so many, you know, the continuous improvement stuff, the mindset stuff that Carol Dweck talks about, and all those kinds of things.
Well, as I listen to you, what I'm very conscious of is that there is a culture within the sales community of this sort of metrics madness, the activity
Mhm.
poor, where people are fixated on how much you do instead
Yeah,
of asking better questions. So one of my favorite questions, series of questions, are what can we stop doing,
yeah,
start doing, do less of, do more of, or do better? Because I subscribe to a philosophy of being intelligently lazy. And I can think of half a dozen people off the top of my head who are running multi-million or decile million or centimillion or even billion-dollar P&Ls.
yeah,
And they achieve their goals and their quotas in 90 minutes a day. And they do that by cutting out the noise, by
yeah,
cutting out the distraction, by cutting out the dead work and knowing what to say no to.
yeah.
So let's explore that. What should we be saying no to?
So, so I'll respond in a slightly different way. We tend to have, as human beings, a react respond mechanism. So we get an email or a phone call or something comes in, and we feel that we must immediately react and respond to that. We don't put any kind of pauses or any kinds of thinking time into that, saying, one, is this something I even need to respond to? Two, do I need to respond to it now? Three is, what am I not doing that is more important than this? You know, one, it's interesting. This spring, I started a new series. It's one of my most popular series of workshops. It's called Shit We Have to Stop. And and the way it came up is I was dealing with a talented CRO in a very, very high performing organization. I mean, this organization was kind of a model if you looked at sales performance and growth and customer centricity and all that. But they were just spinning and overwhelmed. She personally was spinning. And I asked her to show me her calendar, and she, you know, and all this stuff. And I said, why are you sitting in some of these meetings? Why are you doing these? And all we were talking about all of these, and it ended up becoming just habit, and just kind of her react respond mechanism. So we got her entire management team together. I had given them the assignment of these yellow stickies. And I said, you each go out and buy 3 packs of these, and I want you to complete each pack. They had about 80 in these. I said, stuff that I'm doing that I could stop doing, stuff that I'm doing that's somebody else's job, stuff that I'm doing that's somebody else's job, but I don't know who it is. And you can imagine we had this whole team in this conference room, and we had three, big whiteboards. And we started, had them just go put them on the whiteboards, and then we had them come back and say, we divided them into three groups and say, start group clustering them, start seeing the common patterns and start clustering them. And what was interesting is on the stuff that they're doing that they could change, they found that it's just so much habit, so much things. This is the way I've always done things. And they started asking, why should I be doing this? It's a waste of my time. So we were able to just start changing mindsets a little bit there to have them start uh, um, start freeing up time. The two most important ones were the stuff that I'm doing that's somebody else's job. And what we found was in this particular group, there are about 5 or 6 clusters. And I said, so there's not a real clear identification of roles and responsibilities. There's not a real clear identification of workflows. And you need to sit down with them to start clarifying this and say, this is your stuff, this is my stuff, and here's how we work together. And then the third one, which was stuff that they were doing, which they didn't know who was responsible for, actually led to some organizational changes. We actually created some new roles in the organization because there were things like the simplest one was a deal desk, and all they were getting all tangled up with proposals and contracts and things like that. And so and it was taking a lot of sales time, it was taking a lot of management time, so we put in place a deal desk and some other structural changes. But I think what happens is you hear these are very, very high performers. They're very highly motivated. They pretty good on personal accountability and ownership, but they just get caught up in the day to day and don't step back to say, am I doing what's most important um, for me to be achieving my goals and for me to continually improve? And we don't take time to do that.
Well, on purpose, I think if we translate it into what is the job that we all serve that needs to get done, and what
Yeah.
part do I play in contributing to that outcome?
Yeah.
And the question that I extract from what you said is, where am I mistaking motion for progress so I can stop wasting effort and unlock more upside without adding more work?
And I think the challenge is um, people at all levels don't take the time to do that. Um, and again, we confuse motion with outcomes. We don't sit down and take the time, I call it the pause. We don't sit down to take the time to say, what is it that we're really trying to achieve here? What are the best ways to achieve it? What are the things that we might be overlooking? What might we change from what we're currently doing? And also and again, part of it is if you look at, I look at my inbox right now, it's over here, it's just filled with things. And I know 70% of it is nonsense, but my eye keeps diverting over there and it diverts my attention a little bit. And also we just get caught up in the stuff that kind of comes into us, again, whether it's emails, whether it's social media and so on, and we get distracted from what we're really trying to do. I hate to say it in such a crass way, but at its you know, it's time and priority management. Is, do we really understand our priorities? Are our priorities aligned with what we're trying to achieve? And are we allocating our time to our priorities that produce those things?
Well, I think it's even more fundamental than that, which is it's a design issue. Most of these obstacles and distractions can be designed out of someone's day with your three questions.
Yeah.
What can I stop? What am I doing? What am the jobs that I'm doing that I shouldn't be, and what are the jobs that I'm doing but someone else should be doing, but I don't know who they are. Um, those questions lead to the opportunity to redesign your process. If everybody is clear about what the job to be done is that you actually serve, and you understand the part that you play in executing that,
Yeah.
then you can start creating systems and processes. I mean, most of the work that I do now is about architecting those systems so that the human beings in the system know what they need to do by when they need to do it, to what standard, how it will be
Yeah.
measured, what the ripple effect is if they do a good or a bad job. Um, and I keep finding people stuck in this rut where
So,
there is upward delegation. The upward delegation then spirals into extra work, which means that evenings and weekends are lost. They're not present with their families. They're tired
yeah.
and they're burnt out. And before you know it, you're in a rut. And a rut is best defined as a coffin with both ends kicked out.
Yeah.
And that's not a good place to be. So
Yeah.
what I'm seeing over and over again is a failure to diagnose hidden underperformance. They are not focused on the right end of the problem. So they throw money and effort occasionally at training, massive amount of energy on metrics and reporting, and processes that simply aren't closing the performance gaps.
I,
Um,
I I don't disagree with you. I think there's a missing element, and that's something that I'm trying to talk more about. And as I said, I have the follow-on book to this one coming out at the end of February. Is we tend to look at this if we're most people don't look as deeply as you're suggesting and all. They just say slap another training program, do another,
they
you know,
settle.
another playbook and all that kind of thing. Some of them will sit down and look at the systems and processes and workflows and really try to design them. What I've discovered in the research and work that I'm doing is there's a critical element that we don't naturally include in designing the systems and processes, but what are the behaviors we need to really make these systems and processes work? And how do we incorporate those behaviors in how we design the systems and processes? How do we incorporate those behaviors in how we lead and manage people and coach them in executing those systems and processes? So I can design a phenomenal discovery process with customers. Um, I can, and I can teach people how to go through that. But if they don't have curiosity, they won't execute it as well as they could. If they aren't highly customer centric, they won't execute it as well as they could. So if I'm going to design a really good discovery process, what I want to do is I want to try and say, how does curiosity contribute to that? How do I provoke people's curiosity? How do I help them learn how to incorporate curiosity into that discovery process? How do I help them learn how to incorporate customer centricity into that discovery process? So that's where the magic happens, is when you get those behaviors that are critical to the systems and processes that you're trying to do, and don't treat them as separate things, but you integrate them together. Um, and all that's where you kind of get a 1 + 1 = 5.
I agree completely. If I gave any impression that I
Oh
thought
no,
anything else, then the design of the system requires a lot of thought and effort where you
yeah,
design out the flaws. How do I go from an 85% failure rate to an 85% success rate when it comes to closing deals? What can I stop doing that is getting in the way of me being that effective? And I've got clients who operate at that level
yeah,
precisely because they've designed the system and they've then translated that into the human behavior.
yeah,
And they are generally very high on self awareness. They're very high on curiosity. They have high degrees of compassion and they genuinely care about the customer achieving their outcome over and above hitting quota, making their number this month, the commission, because that is a symptom. They see it as a byproduct. It's not
mhm,
the job. And I think part of the problem is that incentives and how we are measured tends to drive a survival instinct in people, which means that they double down on the stuff that actually does us harm.
yeah,
So, what can we do to raise the bar in terms of the thinking of investors, boards, and leadership so that they're not propagating these, what are effectively zero sum games where they end up losing? And if they were a shareholder and they really gave it some thought, they would be livid at the
yeah,
amount of waste and dead work and rework and lost opportunity that's being left on the table.
yeah. Well, I think the simple answer and a real answer is we're designing the wrong incentives and we're providing the wrong motivators. And also, we really need to start thinking about the incentives that we're designing, and we need to start thinking about if we desire these kinds of behaviors, if we desire these, and they're supporting these systems and processes, and if they execute them well, we'll be achieving these goals. What are the correct incentives that and metrics that we need to put in place that constantly reinforce that? And all, because people will do what they're measured to do. And so if we're just measuring on things that don't show them anything on customer centricity, if we don't look at anything around accountability, and things like that, and if our metrics don't hold us accountable for these things, help us become more accountable for these things, then things won't work. I mean, on paper they look nice, in practice they don't work. So I think, again, we have to start looking at, one is we have to stop looking at systems and processes and behaviors separately, but we have to look at them together and consciously say, what are the key behaviors that are critical to the success of this initiative that we're putting forward? How do I not only train and develop and coach people in the system that we're doing for this initiative, but how do I train and develop the behaviors that enable them to execute that system at the highest level possible? And then when I start seeing that, how do I measure and track that behavior, whether it's formal metrics or informal metrics? How do I know, Marcus, that you're a curious person in a sales call?
Fair. Okay. Well, again, by the quality of your attention. Do you listen as a whole body experience? Are you fully present? Are you asking questions that show that you listened and you heard? And are you exploring things that most people would avoid?
So
Um,
that's, as a manager, excuse me for jumping in, but as a manager, when I'm on a sales call with you and we're trying to achieve a goal with a customer, um, you know, we're focused on achieving the goal, but I want to note those behaviors and say curiosity is really critical for us to achieve our goals in this sales call. And this person is displaying the right characteristics of curiosity. So, after, in the post-call debrief, I'm going to, say, compliment them on that, and say that. So again, I think what I discovered in this is that mindsets and behaviors is nothing new. Um, Systems, processes, and mechanisms are things that we build all the time. We've been treating them separately. And the key thing is we have to really get kind of a flywheel effect going, we have to integrate them. So again, what I kind of say is as I'm introducing a new system or process, what are the critical behaviors that allow us to really excel in implementing that system and process? And it'll be different behaviors for different things and all, but
well, there are two more that I'd like to add to that list. One is, did the customer advance at least one step towards their intended
yeah.
outcome? And the second is, did both sides learn something? If you're asking questions simply to gather information, you are not
Yeah.
adding any real value to the customer.
But
And that
see, then
moment is
that
great.
becomes the customer centricity piece. So when I make a sales call, I'm interested in not just curiosity, asking questions for question's sake, and they may be meaningless questions, but I'm customer centricity is I want to help the customer and I want to help them move forward in achieving their problems. So, so those are for, virtually every customer interaction that we have, things like curiosity, customer centricity are really critical. And if we aren't embedding those into the systems and processes, and if we aren't observing and coaching on those, we're not achieving as much as we could.
And that reinforcement is critical. There is something that I want to go back to before I forget,
Mhm.
because I think it's important and it ties back to how we can liberate leadership. Of the three piles of post-it notes, stop doing, wrong owner, and unknown owner, which is the most damaging to not address?
Um, I think the most damaging to not address was the third pile and all, because that's work that is not technically our job, but we don't know where in the organization it should be performed. And so in that, a lot of things literally don't get done, or in the case of this particular client, everybody was figuring it out for themselves. and they were doing it very, very differently. So you had an efficiency issue, and a time they spend doing it issue. But in this case, you also had some regulatory and legal issues that might come up.
So how much time did they recover by addressing those pile three?
They're still in the process of doing it, and also they're improving. So here's kind of the good news and bad news. We went through all three piles. They simplified things and started structuring things and identifying critical issues. Piles 2 and 3 ended up becoming the most important. Pile 1 is one I'm continuing to harass them on because even though they said I can stop doing these things. I'm scheduling these meaningless meetings. I'm doing these things. They fall back into bad habits.
And how much of their working week is taken up with stuff that they should stop doing?
It's hard to tell. I mean, the interesting thing is they said at the end of the workshop and subsequent ones I've done is this won't cause you to work any fewer hours. What it will cause you to do is focus your time where you have the most impact. And I think the reality of that is a lot of times we go through these exercises to say, how much time can I save and how much time can I free up? There's so much stuff sitting on each of our plates, and so much of it is important. But now we can start structuring things so that we're really working on the most critical things for us to really achieve our potential.
Well, in our experience of over the last 25 years, the average recovery is 2 days per person per week from the SDR all
Yeah,
the way up to the CRO.
yeah,
Now, that 40% uplift in capacity is then deployed on high value, high return behaviors. And that then becomes a force multiplier for CAC, IRR, NRR, GRR, EBIT. And those are the things that boards should be paying closer attention to because it costs nothing to
yeah.
be more effective.
So if you do that, that's wonderful. And we haven't, in the things that I've been doing recently, we haven't been measuring it and all, but we've just been kind of what we can see is we are getting more of the right stuff accomplished, and there's more discipline and rigor as we go through kind of the workflows and things like that. But here's the dilemma I see all the time. I see all these people, for instance, today saying, I spend too much time writing prospecting letters. And so now I have AI that is spinning out thousands or 10,000s of higher quality prospecting letters than I can send out. And I do that, and it's freeing up all my time. And I say, okay, what are you doing with that time? And they're saying, writing more prospecting letters. And see, so that's kind of a leadership issue. I'll set aside the fact that, is the quality of those outreaches any better? I'll just set that to the side for the moment. But I'll say we've freed up people's time, and you see all sorts of people using AI to free up people's time. My question is, how are you redeploying that time? And they aren't actually redeploying that time. And this is a leadership issue. And the leadership issue is saying, I want to take you from we've recovered 50% of your time for doing prospecting outreaches, prospecting letters. Now I'm going to redeploy you into this, which is more focused on that. But when I talk to customers about this, managers, individual contributors, I say, what are you doing with that freed up time? Nobody has an answer. And what it ends up being as you go through the discussion, they're just continuing doing what they're doing, but only more of it.
Well, the devil creates work for idle hands.
Yeah,
So they'll fill it with what they know and is familiar. The way
exactly.
we approach it is we look at, well, how can I do less but better on purpose to create a better
Yeah,
outcome and
yeah,
generate more? So one of the first things I would always recommend people do is they focus on cleaning their list because so many lists are filled with the total addressable market,
yeah,
and only about 3% of those are likely to be paying customers in the next couple of quarters.
yeah,
Um, and they don't focus enough time on relationship building because they're under pressure to hit quota and meet the valuation targets. And so they fixate on prospects who are probably already deciding, and it's a very bloody sea with a lot of competition and a
yeah,
lot of noise. So we narrow it down to maybe a dream 20 per salesperson, and their job is to focus on those customers who are likely to buy in the next 6 to 36 months. And the net result of that is that even their short-term pipeline starts to increase and improve, but their close rate goes through the roof. Sales cycles shorten, the
Yeah.
average order value increases, retention is higher. And the other thing that baffles me is this obsession with new logos. When, if you're an established business, why not try and protect the accounts that you do have instead of having a 15% churn rate? And why not focus on expansion and renewal and also co-creating new product that other ideal customers will be attracted to and want to buy?
Yeah.
Because your cost of sale will go down to 1/6 to maybe 1/20th
Yeah.
of what you're spending at the moment. Your average sales cycle length will reduce by up to 70%,
Yeah.
and you don't then have to sprint to stand still.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, I think we've seen kind of these pendulum swings, in particular in the technology marketplaces, is you see the pendulum swings, has been in the past 10, 12 years has been on net new customer acquisition. Now the pendulum has swung to retention, and net new customer acquisition is an afterthought. In reality, in business, you have to do both. Um, Probably the bulk. I was invited to a VC conference, and they were talking about, we've discovered the secret to revenue growth and stable revenue growth and all that is retention. And I just said, well, gee, every other business in the world has discovered that decades, if not centuries ago. And if you look at the annual reports of any large company in any kind of different in any kind of industry, you discover that retaining and growing those clients drives most of the revenue, and net new acquisition creates new things that you can do to grow that and grow that base. But they treat it as an either or, where we need to do both, and we need to do that. And again, part of this is, I go back to a mindset is when I was growing up in sales, I started in IBM, and one of the mindsets that we had, since I ran a couple of just major accounts, they said, my mindset was, it's my God-given right to 100% share of customer. I have to figure out how to do that. So I was looking at how I grew the customer, not just through renewals of what I was doing, but how I explored the different divisions and business units to find new opportunities. And so we don't see that even in kind of account-based stuff that people are doing. They're staying with the customers they are. They're looking at some retention, renewal, some possible expansion, but they aren't going to, I remember going with a client some years ago to visit a customer, and they were talking to a bunch of engineers in one room, and I just wandered to grab some coffee, and there was an engineer standing there, and I was talking to him about what he did, and I said, geez, we have something my client has something that can help you. But my client would never talk to that person because they never, talk to people on the desks next to the people that they were dealing with. So we have to kind of be, and again, this is where I think curiosity and customer centricity starts having you say, what more can I do? What more can I help our customer do? And to do that.
Well, you can win net new logos if you see the customer as an ecosystem. You can sell organically, you can sell through and to their joint venture partners, through their alliances, through their supply chain. You can
Mhm.
sell to alumni, you can sell to the customer's customer. And what baffles me is how much effort is wasted on going after net new cold when you could go net new hot. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
but that just, it's a perennial frustration for me.
But
But
again, we fall into the habits that we've always done, or we fall into the habits of what's comfortable, or we simply are exhausted or overwhelmed and we can't do much more. And so how do we start clearing out the exhaustion overwhelm factor?
Well, I think what you do is with some of the recovered time is you actually spend it on thinking and reflection.
Yeah.
And almost no one I ever speak to has 20 minutes a day for thinking. That single habit frees up enormous amounts of time and effort on wasted and dead work.
Yeah, that's one of the things I coach our clients on, and particularly the executives, is I'm obnoxious and actually want to look at their calendars,
Yeah.
have them display it on the screen, and I say, how much thinking and reflection time have you scheduled every day? and I insist on them scheduling some thinking and reflection time, and I tell them this is sacred. No crisis can displace this. You have to do these things. Um, and it's hard to have that discipline, but once you start having it, you find that everything else starts falling in order, because because of what I started this conversation with, we have this respond react orientation, and in that respond react orientation, we aren't necessarily doing the right and the most important or the best or things in the best way. And so now that we start structuring that thinking and reflection time, now we can start looking at that and say, did I handle that situation correctly? Am I handling these situations correctly? How do I change this? And how do I start improving it? Um, and and that's so critical. And if you don't, at the end of the, I do it at the end of every day, and part of it is, I do journaling. So the journaling helps me reflect on, I do kind of a business journal, and then I have a separate personal journal, but a business journaling, what did I accomplish? What could I have changed? And it's not coming up with a to-do list, but it's reflecting on what I did, how I did it, what I could do more effectively, and what I want to change.
Well, if we look at the structure of your book, why did you design it in that way?
Um, so, so what I wanted to do was, I identified, and people will disagree, and that's fine, is I identified about 7, 8 core behaviors, mindsets and behaviors around really excellence in general, but I oriented it around sales excellence. And the order, I think I got the order right, but it could be in any order. But what I wanted to do is provide kind of an overview of what is the challenge facing us, what is the challenge to achieve our full potential, why are we settling for less than we could achieve, and then I started walking through the behaviors, which start with curiosity, customer centricity, accountability, comfort with ambiguity and complexity, um, discipline. And this is what we've been talking about. Am I disciplined in the way I do things? Do I have a structure to my day? Do I have a structure in the way I do things? And those kinds of things. And we go through that. Another part is I address in the book, and I address these at the end because I wanted to walk through the behaviors. Then I wanted to walk through failure, a diagnosis of failure. And I came up with this. Our mutual friend Lahat is probably one of the best experts on failure that I've ever seen. And not through his personal experience, but he's done a lot of thinking. I'm trying to convince him to write a book on that. But Lahat and I talked about failure and the mechanisms of failure, and it fit really nicely into kind of, after we have these behaviors, we will fail. What does failure mean? How do we learn from failure? How do we not become overwhelmed? And then the next chapter then is purpose, because all these behaviors and things don't mean anything unless they're grounded in some sort of purpose. And so what's our purpose? And I didn't want it to be philosophical or anything like this, but what are we as individuals trying to achieve? It's not, do I want a certain income or things, but what is my purpose and what I'm trying to do? The thing too is we lose our purpose every once in a while. How do we lose and how do we regain our purpose? Or sometimes our purpose changes. One of the interesting things, and I shared in the story, is to some degree, I had lost my purpose over the last couple of years. Even though I have very, very high, we have very, very high revenue, and we're very well known as a consulting company. We do lots of big projects. We produce tremendous results. To some degree, I was just kind of settling for, is good enough good enough? Um, and my level of good enough was very, very high, but I knew somehow I was feeling an emptiness that I could achieve much more. And actually, the act of sitting down and writing this book with Claude helped me rediscover my purpose. Um, is I looked at, our company name is Partners in Excellence. I established the company in 1991. We always pursue excellence, but I'd stopped talking about excellence. The subtitle in our company name is Making a Difference. I've always wanted to make a difference, but I hadn't consciously been focusing on that. And so the act of writing this book and looking at it helped me rediscover my purpose. So if you look at where I am now versus where I was before, again, we were performing at an extraordinary level, and people would say, you're just so successful, but I knew I could do more. And so now, I am so energized because now I can go back to, we are partners in excellence. We want to focus on excellence and how we help each individual and each organization achieve excellence. And we have some um, mindsets and behaviors around that. In the next book, you'll see how we integrate that with the mechanisms and create more of a holistic system. But this has just so energized me and driven me. So that's the next thing. And then the final chapter before the conclusion is, okay, let's toss AI into this.
Well, I want to explore that in some detail. So when you were working with Claude, what did you do to make Claude your thought partner instead of just abdicating and having it churn out the first response?
Well, first, the way I started this, the process was really fascinating. Is is I've had some publishers at me wanting me to write a book. I've had my second book. I have 10 drafts of my second book. And I've been
That's
stuck.
familiar.
I've been stuck for years and years and years. And each year I write a new draft of the book. And it's a slightly different perspective. It's updated, but I keep getting stuck. So what I did is I uploaded it to Claude and I said, Claude, also have 4,000 blog articles. I need to write a book, something around this. Give me some ideas. So it went through all the 10 drafts of the book, the second book that I had. It went through 4,000 blog articles and said, here's some alternative choices for some books. And it went through a whole bunch of things. A lot of it was fairly mechanical about how to develop sales processes or sales methodologies or hiring the best or leadership kind of things. And it came up with this idea around sales excellence. And I said, go into that a little bit more. What would that look like? And we went back and forth, and and truly, it's a thought partner. I said, you're missing a lot of points about this. And what it was as if as you and I talk, I'm learning a lot and growing it myself and having some new perspectives. That was my same experience with Claude. So I went back and forth with Claude to do this. And over a period of several days, we refined a very detailed outline, a chapter by chapter outline for this thing. But what it really did is it provided me a very different perspective than I had before. It helped me recognize things. If you look at 4,000 blog articles, there are patterns about what I write about. And it was identifying those patterns. And all of a sudden, it kind of slapped me in the face that said, I'm obsessed with these issues. I might as well do a book around these things. So it helped me do that. Um,
And what did you learn about the limitations that you'd put on yourself? Because my experience of working extensively and over a prolonged period with AI is that it opens my eyes to fresh perspectives, and I'm moved out of my perception into having range and depth.
yeah.
I'm curious what your experience was.
It's very much the same. It really opened me up to some new perspectives. I mean, I particularly like both Claude and Gemini. Um, ChatGPT is just going to say, "Gee, Dave, this is a wonderful chapter. You might rephrase a few things," but Claude and Gemini will come back, and they're too polite to use these words and say, "Dave, you really messed up on this one." Um, but they'll come back and say, "Your argument is a little weak here. Have you thought about these issues?" And all of a sudden, I think about it and say, I completely missed that. And so it's that interaction as a thought partner, as a debate partner, and part of it is I train it to hold me accountable for these things. I train it to behave in a certain way, so I get it that way. Um, and so it's just such a phenomenal, really thought partner, debate partner, calls me on my stuff and elevates the level of my own level of thinking tremendously. And that's how I use AI every day, um, separate from the book, and it's how we're providing tools to our clients with AI that profoundly elevate their level of thinking. What we've done with AI, what I think too many people have focused on with AI is the time it saves me and the work it does for me. And earlier we were talking about, well, what do we do with the time that's saved? And I'm using AI not to save me time, but to help me think much better and help me execute much better. And it's that itself ends up saving me more time than can you write 1,000 prospecting letters for me?
Well, I think what most people have done is they've done more of what they already do badly, but
Yeah.
now they've done it at scale and pace.
Well,
And
the terminology I have for it is AI amplifies who you already are. So if you are a deep thinker, thoughtful, and you're really looking to grow and change and evolve in what you're doing, AI is a tremendous partner for doing this. If you are a lazy idiot, AI is really good at making you a much bigger idiot. And also what it's who we are and what we bring into the AI experience. All AI will do is amplify that. It won't change it.
And so when you're using AI, one of the things that I would always recommend to people is have it operate at temperature zero and feed it the instruction, tell me why I'm wrong, and go and find evidence to prove me
Yeah.
wrong. If you don't do that, you'll be pandered to and it will just stroke your ego. And that's lethal.
Well, and one of the things that in the tools that we provide our clients, in all is what we do is we expressly instruct the the tool not to give answers, but to help the person discover the answers for themselves. And so we have these conversations, and it may be on a certain topic, for instance, maybe strategic planning or something like that, is we're trying to develop a strategic plan, which I'd be thinking of, and it'll walk you through that. And where most people will say, give me a strategic plan for my company. And if you put that prompt, if you put that into a chat box in our tools, it would say, I can help you think about and develop the strategic plan. And it'll keep asking you questions for you to discover it yourself. So what happens is, one, you learn more, you internalize it more, you own it more, and it's probably much more accurate because here, when we're going through these things where we aren't giving specific answers, we minimize the impact of hallucinations. I don't know. I've seen people actually develop strategic plans by saying, this is our company, we're in this industry, here are our competitors, here's the things we want to do, develop a strategic plan, and it invents garbage. It looks really good, and you could have a kind of pretty fancy, and it'll even, if you're using Gemini, it'll even churn out a nice board deck. But it's all hallucination. But here is, if all I'm doing is asking you questions, if I'm bringing in knowledge, expert knowledge from something in patterns that I've recognized and asking you questions, you develop the answers yourself. And again, the process of what you learn, how you grow, the personal ownership you have of that is far greater than anything else.
Absolutely. Dave, we've come to time. Um, what question haven't I asked that I should have?
Oh, this has been really, you've covered so much. I really appreciate it. And there are always so many more questions, but this would take another 10 hours. And
You're very welcome to come back.
good. Well, this has been such a fantastic discussion. These are the discussions I really relish, and it's such a great opportunity to talk to you about this. Thank you.
Well, would you come back for the release of the book in February?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and there what you'll see is again, I consciously separated the mindsets and behaviors from the systems, processes, tools, metrics, and all that, because it would have been an 800-page book if I combined it. But here, what I'll do is I'll take the mindsets and behaviors and integrate them into the mechanisms and say, these don't stand alone. If all I do is, if for instance, maybe the last thing I should say is, if all we do is focus on mindsets and behaviors, we still won't achieve our full potential, because we have to have those systems and processes to do that. but we can't be thinking of them as two separate pillars that we work on. We have to start thinking of them as integrated pillars. So if I'm developing a new process, what are the key behaviors that are critical for the execution of that process? And how do I reinforce those in the implementation of the process?
Excellent. And if you had your time again and you could whisper in the ear of the idiot Dave, age 23 or so, what one bit of advice would you give him in this day and age with AI?
Being constantly curious and trying to learn is a foundational behavior. Because I know, and maybe this is my physics background, is I know somehow through that curiosity I can figure anything out. And so I would say, at Dave at age 23, well, I'm aspiring to be 23. I'm really in my early 20s. I just have been ridden hard and put away wet. But at age 23, I would say constant curiosity and leverage things like AI to help you become more curious and help you learn more and help you develop different perspectives. Because again, it's such an amplifier. It is, if I've been using LLMs actively for about 3 years now, and they keep getting better. And again, my level of personal performance, my level of performance with my clients, and my clients' level of performance has just skyrocketed.
Lovely to hear. How can people get hold of you?
It's DA Brock at excellence.com. It's the word excellence without the last E. I'm not quite that excellent. I'm almost excellent. Um, and or on LinkedIn, or my blog is partnersinexcellenceblog.com.
Dave Brock, thank you.
Thanks so much, Marcus. This has really been a fun conversation.
Absolutely. And looking forward to seeing you again in February. In the meantime, stay safe, happy selling. And if you found this useful, insightful, then please get the book. It's well worth a read. Apply it and do the exercises and map what happens by tracking it. Keep a journal, capture your lessons, and then report back to Dave or to myself, because both of us would be exceptionally curious how you're achieving excellence incrementally. Don't try and eat the elephant in one big mouthful. And have a great time playing with it, because experimentation will cause you to grow faster than trying to boil the ocean. So without any more further ado, Dave, thank you.